Midday Show. I'm Jeff Everett. He is Mark Messina. He's alive. He's ready. Some really, I don't
As
call
opposed
him.
to you, are you not?
Oh, I'm kicking. I'm more worried about you're like lounging back, like you. I'm worried about you.
I'm
That's all.
comfortable today. Well, I had to
I
take. I took my boots off because they were like snowy and stuff, and I didn't want to get the whole place wet. So I just took
yeah.
them off, and then I just had my. So I just kicked my feet up. I'm comfy today. They're good.
Okay. Well, don't get too comfy because we have some touchy subjects today. One of the things we're going to talk about, we've got a Hopkins study on lockdowns that I think people are not going to like. There's two different angles to it. We're going to talk about both of them. There is now a China and Russia partnership that has been announced, a no limits partnership. We're going to talk about that and what that could possibly mean. And then Amazon's price gouging us. That's how it feels anyway. So we're going to talk about that as well. And what does Amazon possibly need to raise their prices for? So we're going to talk about all of those things. Before we get to those, how are you feeling? It has like a snowed in. You and I agree. These are some of our favorite days, kind of like the snowed in, you're forced inside. I don't even know if we're snowed in, but it's icy, it's wet, it's rainy, whatever you want to call it. How are you feeling today?
It is. I was telling my kids last night. When I was a kid, which was a long time ago, we very, very rarely got school canceled the day before.
Yeah.
They kind of had that belief, and maybe the weather forecasting wasn't as good. I don't know. But they kind of were on a wait and see. And there were lots of times we would go 2-hour delay, and then they would cancel in the morning. So now, knowing, I think my kids got canceled at 7 last night. I think it just makes for a better world because everyone kind of mentally prepares, and especially when for them to get out a Thursday afternoon, which as it turns out was an overreaction because it just didn't get cold yet. The roads were just wet for a long time. But anyway, they get out Thursday afternoon, get Friday off, Saturday off, Sunday off. As a kid, like this is living.
It is. No, this is, we said it yesterday. This is the perfect, if you are at that age, this is like a once in a 4-year span where on Thursday afternoon, you basically have the next 3.5 days. So, yes, I agree with you.
I should say this, though. There are some districts that just go remote.
Yeah.
Like Williamsport didn't phone it in today. Williamsport, this is a real day. It's just a remote day. And then there are other schools that just bag it like a snow day. So, yeah, I don't know which is better. There's pros and cons to each, but I know as a kid, they always say that your parents are always saying, but you have to make it up. And we're like, who cares? We're not making it up today. So, yeah, I don't think there are many kids that are upset. Although there's lots.
Are you ready to dive into this?
I was thinking of this. You know who is like, who's sitting home and having no idea what to do? Basketball officials.
That's true.
They've had 2 nights off in a row. They never have 2 nights off in a row.
Yeah, no, it's very, very true. There were a couple of games last night, but yeah, for the most part, there's not a lot going on.
I didn't know anyone played last night. There were games?
There were a couple. Yeah, I think there were a couple down in the Coal region that played. I know Southern Columbia played a game. Like, there were a couple of games last night.
Oh, okay. I thought everybody was off.
But to your point, yes, a lot of people were sitting at home not really knowing what to do last night. Let's open up with this one because I'm fascinated by this one. Johns Hopkins released a research, a study, whatever you want to refer to it as. It's called a review and meta-analysis of the effects of lockdowns on COVID-19 mortality. Essentially, to dumb it down, what they did is they looked at how effective lockdowns were from stopping people dying compared to not locking down, or states, countries, nations, whatever it was, that waited a little longer or didn't lock down as quickly as other ones had. This research from Johns Hopkins, you and I have talked a lot about numbers. I almost go based off of Johns Hopkins pro and against the COVID vaccines, against mortality rates, everything. Hopkins is known as like one of the go-to institutions when you're trying to find out research and data and what's actually happening. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I just want to interject this couple of things. Remember when we had the whole Groundhog Day discussion?
Yes.
With the S and the non-S? There is it's Johns Hopkins. It's not John Hopkins.
Oh, there you go. All right. Yeah. So this is another one I have wrong. I have wrong in my repertoire.
And it's weird because people just call it Hopkins.
Sure.
whenever they're just like it's hot, and it just seems like a name. But I lived there. It's in Baltimore, so that's when I learned it. But anyway,
so you're cheating. You didn't really know that. You just happened to live in
Baltimore.
I didn't know that.
So there are a few things I know, and that was one.
So one of the things that's unique about this, what the study has essentially found and what they're coming out and saying is that the lockdowns themselves had very little effect on COVID-19 mortality. Now, I can't express enough. It doesn't talk about slowing it down. It doesn't talk about infection versus non-infection. It's strictly just looking at deaths and mortality rate. And it essentially found that based off of the study, that there was only a 0.2% effect on mortalities over COVID-19 because of lockdowns or stay-at-home orders that were given across Europe and across the United States. And so that's the one side of this is diving into the effectiveness of lockdowns and reading through some of this stuff. It kind of just demonstrated that it didn't do what officials or what governments believed it was going to do at the time. I think a lot of governments went with the information that they had. And now in hindsight that we get to kind of like Monday quarterback this and look back. And if you're a researcher at Hopkins and you're able to kind of look back through that and everything, I think they're finding out that it really didn't do what they had hoped that it would do.
Well, I would love to sit down. This is, when you brought this up to me, this has now fascinated me too, because I would love to sit down with the people who did the study. And there's lots of questions to ask about how they did this, because any study like this needs data. So then the question is,
do you want me to answer that?
Well, hold on.
Because I'll read
the speculations that I have.
No, right, but I'll read the three. I can read the 3 sentences that tell you how they did it.
No, but these are the points I have. When you're talking about because some places that locked down I don't want to say took COVID much more seriously, but there are certainly places and countries whose data collection was more stringent than others. Another aspect to this, when you do a real study, it's like why they do when they're testing a medicine and they do a control group and a placebo group or a drug, so you can compare the two. The only way in society we could ever do this well is if we brought COVID-19 back, did nothing, and then compared how it turned out with doing nothing to how it turned out with having shutdowns and lockdowns and slowdowns. Because the other one of the fallout questions, and I don't know if this would be one of the things, the issue was the overrunning of the hospitals and how many people now their cancer treatments got pushed off. Their people had other medical issues and couldn't get beds. And so what was the other fallout of the overrunning of the hospital that wasn't a direct cause of a COVID death or illness, but was an indirect cause because the medical system was overrun. So it would be fascinating to hear how many of these things they took into effect and how accurate they really think the data is.
But so this is everything you said is correct. You don't think a John Hopkins research paper took any of that into account? Is that kind of what you're implying?
No, I mean, I think they do, but it's like when you play against a team and their best player's hurt. Like, know they would have been better with their best player, but you don't know how much. And you can't just say, well, this guy averaged 25 points and the sub averaged 8 points. So because you just don't know. So there's a lot of stuff that they could take into account, but you can't get hard, fast data when there's no data to get. So and I'm not disagreeing with any, it's such a fascinating thing. And I'm sure that they did it. From what they did it as well as possible. And I don't question any of the stuff. I just, you get my point. You get my point. I can't articulate it very well, but you get what I'm trying to say.
I understand where you're coming from. The funny part though is for 2 years every decision was based off of the data from institutes like John Hopkins, right? Like we decided to lock down because at some point there was a study done by somewhere like Hopkins and that was the best thing to do. And so it's just funny to me that we go through this period of time. We trust these institutions. We trust these organizations. We're making the best choices in the moment that we believe are the right thing. And then now when like a research paper comes out and we Monday quarterback this, and now it's kind of like, well, it's nothing's perfect. And maybe, how do you control group that? And like, I trust them, but how do you possibly, it's just a little ironic that I feel like a lot of society would say the things that you're saying.
Well,
and there's an irony to that.
I'm not saying I hear this and I'm poo-pooing it. I'm saying I'm hearing this, and I would love to have a 45-minute discussion with the gurus that did it and say, how did you do this? And then listen, and then how. Not that I'm questioning. How do I say it? Not that I'm just curious, because the whole thing is so fascinating. And obviously, if I was in a room with these guys, I'd be the dumbest person in the room, and that's why I'd be asked. I would be the Joe Rogan of the group, asking these people. And no, I think it'd be fascinating.
Same. So one of the ways that they did this, they did a systematic search and a screening procedure. So they used 18,590 studies that were identified as potentially addressing the study that they were looking at, right? So they collected every study that pertained to the effectiveness of lockdowns. They took those 18,000 plus studies, they screened all of them. They decided that 34 of the studies ultimately qualified, meaning there was enough actual data collected, there was enough actual control group, like all the things that you're discussing. So they took 18,000 studies, narrowed it down to the 34 that fit the category of what you just described. And out of those 34, 24 were included into the study as they qualified, they reached criteria, they were professional studies done correctly. Hopkins used those 24, built off of it for their model, and that is how they decided the numbers. That's how they came to a conclusion with the numbers. So, I mean, this isn't, 18,000 plus, like, legit. And again, the 18,000 studies they were picking from, they were identified as professional studies. So it's not like you and I could write a paper and submit it into these 18,000.
Oh, we could write a paper, all right.
Oh, 100%. But these 18,000 studies were like professional, medical, higher ed, like research institution papers. And they literally said, all right, which ones like actually did the work? Which ones have the largest database? Which ones use the numbers correctly? Which ones had the control groups? And they looked at all things, and then they narrowed it down to the best 24 to come up with this. The other part of this,
I get that, but here's my point. So, and I understand that they had to figure out criteria how to do that. You can't tell me out of those other 18,000, there wasn't valuable and accurate information. Now, there may have been inaccurate information, and there may have been the record keeping may not have been as deep or as thorough or whatever, but there's still, you can't tell me all that information was worthless, but they threw it all out. So that's just what I'm talking about.
I'm still not sure what you're trying to say.
That there's just no way that you can look back on something like this and say, if we'd have done it this way, this is how it would have turned out.
But they're not saying
there's just
that.
No way.
They're not saying what we should have done differently. What they're saying is, here's what we did, here's the effect. This is how much we accomplished by doing what we did. And that's what they're saying in the study. And what they're showing is that we really didn't do much when it came to mortality rate. We didn't do as much. This wasn't as effectiveness as what we had thought based off of the studies we had previous 2020. That's what they're saying.
But we never had COVID-19 previous 2020.
Correct.
That's what
but there were pandemics, and they did studies, and they did the best they could, just like kind of like what we're saying with this study. Like they did the best they could.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
People already down. So I guess for me, it's the idea that they're not telling us necessarily what we did was wrong. They're not saying that, like, here's what we should have done, or that it was a complete failure. But what they are saying is, like, we can put a number on how effective we think this was based off of mortality, and that number is 0.2%. So based off of this study, they believe that 0.2% of mortality was saved compared to what
and
it
I
looks,
guess,
compared to what our models show beforehand.
and I guess the other point is, no matter how speculative, or whether you believe everything they say, whether you're speculative, whether you're just curious or whatever, at the end of the day, these eggheads at Hopkins, who are smarter than the rest of us, there's no doubt about that. Basically, what they're saying is, the effect was marginal. It may not be 0.2, but it wasn't great. It was
No, I think in
that,
society,
I would not argue that. That's fair.
I think in society right now, there's a belief that like the lockdown saved millions of lives. And I think what they're saying in this paper is that like that's not really the case. I think that's what the paper is saying.
And see, like, here's another point. And this one, so say there's no lockdown. Say the hospitals are overrun even more than we think. Say, because the hospitals are overrun even more than they were, that medical personnel are just like, forget this, I'm taking a factory job. And then how many deaths do we have above and beyond that? Because we have nobody left to work at hospitals.
And that's fine, but that's kind of the point in their paper. The point in their paper is like, now that you can look back and you can see like how many people needed ventilators, how many people needed like direct urgent care, versus how many people had a cold, how many people just needed rest, how many. So what they're doing is they're looking at those numbers, and part of the thing that they do in the study is they basically wipe out the medical system and they compare it to other pandemics where there really was no true medical system. Right? Like if you go back to 1918 and beyond, like there wasn't a real medical system, right? Like
it was reaching.
That's exactly. So the point they're making is they can go back and they can say, here's what different things looked like at that time when there was no medical system. Here's what the mortality rate would have been. And they're using those rates to then double back and compare it to. So even the example you're giving, they're using that in the study. Like your circumstance and what you're using, they're using that to help balance out what the number should be.
My contention always was that and this is just my speculation of trying to, read the tea leaves, that the lockdown and the slowdown was done more to protect the medical industry, where hospitals were overflow.
I don't disagree.
So anyway, all right.
I don't disagree. Okay,
next
that was good. We're probably coming back to that at some point, because you are very. I cannot get over like. Well, real quick, because I'm not done with it yet.
We're coming back to it right now.
Because we're not even done. I had mentioned before, like John Hopkins. If you watch any mainstream media, John Hopkins is referred to consistently, whether they're talking about numbers.
They are the creme de la creme
all the time. There is a release put out. Here are the outlets that have not released this study. And again, they're on top of everything Hopkins does. If you go on the AP and whatever, like every day, Hopkins said this or somebody said that. Here are the people that did not release this study: the Associated Press, Reuters, USA Today, Axios, and Politico, the New York Times, the Washington Post. You also have other media outlets, including your CNNs, your MSNBCs, your Washington Post. None of these outlets released this study. And the weird part about it is I don't even think the study is damning. Like, I don't think the study completely says that, like, lockdowns are horrendous. The study's just simply stating the facts that, like, it didn't have the effect on mortality rates that we thought it did. And yet none of these outlets released this study after, for 2 years, all I heard was Hopkins this and Hopkins that.
Do you know who did release it?
Who did release it? You have...
No, I was kidding. NorthcentralPa.com. That's who released it.
NorthcentralPa.com released it. Vice released it. Fox released it.
I thought I threw you up a softball there for you to crush. I was trying to
could have crushed it and gave NorthcentralPa.com some plug. I
gave you that alley-oop right by the rim. All you had to do was catch it and throw it down.
And listen, let's just call this what it is. I gave lots of Hopkins stats on the show earlier in the year, and you had very little pushback on the Hopkins statistics. And now today, we're a little more critical of the Hopkins Research Institute and how they do their stuff.
No.
That's
And
all.
this is, I'm not critical. I'm curious because
Okay, that's fair.
because I was a math guy, I have a mathematics degree. And in these studies, for all this stuff, you need data. And how do you collect data on something that never happened? And that would be, I would just be like, I could sit down with these people for probably 3 hours and ask them questions.
Me too. I mean, they had 18,000 studies, but it's, whatever. It's okay. This is I knew I was going to bother you on that one. This is the other one, and you and I are not.
I like the times that you just try to bother me.
I think I thought you would.
You just have like a teenager's ability just to I'm just trying to annoy you.
You just pushed back harder on that than I ever would have imagined. To me, it's a Hopkins study. Here's the mortality rate. Let's talk about it. And you were kind of like, well, how did they do this? I'm curious. How are they coming up with? And I was just kind of like, oh wow, that surprised me. That's all.
Well, I mean, I get it, but just because if an NFL offensive coordinator comes in the room and says, well, if we'd have thrown the ball more, we'd have won more games.
But that's not what they're saying.
Well,
they're not saying we shouldn't have lockdown.
Give me all the.
Yes, they're not saying we shouldn't have lockdown. What they're simply saying is that it didn't save the mortality rate. It didn't save what people have in their head. There's people in society that truly believed we saved millions of people locking down. And all they're saying is when you go through the actual numbers and you go through history and the data, we actually didn't save millions of people. That's all they're saying.
Well, see, and yes, and to take it a step further, one of the things that we had discussed is when they talked about how many people we saved in lockdowns, we used to talk about how many people do we save from COVID, but how many mental health issues and how many abuse issues did we cause by shutting people in? So yes, if you just want to look at the COVID world, so that was, yes, and we had discussed that as well back. We probably haven't talked about that for a while, but way back when we talked about that. So anyway.
And they have some of that's in the study too. They talk about the effect it had on learning loss for children, all these different things. So it's very, very interesting. It's worth reading if you get the chance. A review and meta-analysis on the effects of lockdowns on COVID-19 mortality. It just kind of puts into perspective what the actual Monday quarterback view of the mortality rate is for COVID-19. And it's done by a very trusted institution.
Speaking of this, I'm just going to throw this in, and I forgot to mention this, but you talk about lockdown. We're all snowed in today or iced in. Mm-hmm. Did you see the story about the people in California, the couple that were snowed in their cabin for 2 months?
No.
And they had to helicopter them out?
Did they break up?
I don't. Apparently, they all lived, but a tree fell and they couldn't get out, and the roads were so bad. Something like December 6th, from December 6th till yesterday, they were and they had to get them out by helicopter. So you can find that. There's not a whole lot of great details, but that's pretty much the summation. 2 months. Wow. How are you and your girlfriend doing snowed in a cabin? And the dog. They had a dog there too.
Where was this?
Your girlfriend, your dog, 2 months.
Where was this in the pre-meeting?
I don't know. I forgot all about it until you just mentioned that.
Mark, anything you want to talk about today? Nope. And then you just drop a helicopter couple snowed in story halfway through the show. Real quick, we're not gonna take as long on these two, but they're worth diving into. China and Russia proclaimed a deep strategic partnership on Friday to balance what they portrayed as the malign global influence of the United States. This is interesting for a handful of reasons. One of them, they are calling it a no limits partnership. So essentially, there is no forbidden areas in the Russia-China cooperation. China will go as far as they need to help Russia. Russia will go as far as they need to help China. The other thing that's unique about this, both leaders believe that Taiwan belongs to China, and they're also saying that they are against NATO enlargement. So they are trying to say NATO should add no more partners, NATO should not expand their global reach than what it already possesses. And then the other part of this is that they have a manifesto. They're claiming they have a manifesto. And the whole idea is to counter U.S. domination, is basically to say the United States influence on the world needs to either diminish or be stopped, and that they will work together to do that. This is all released after a meeting at the Beijing Olympics when Putin visited. So I don't know enough about the global map of politics to really dive in about it, but to me, this is significant. I think we should have Jason Fink on at some point, but this is pretty significant in the grand scope of it.
This is not good, but we need to have somebody on smarter than us.
We do, but I still think it's interesting to talk about. I know the United States and their influence. Maybe it's my lack of travel. I've been overseas. I've been to different places. I have left the country numerous times. I'm always flabbergasted at the difference between people who visit America and how much they like America versus people who have never visited America, and just kind of their take on it. Because they kept referring to the West and how against the West they are. And there's people who love this culture and there's people who are so against this culture. And I've never truly understood the balance, truly.
Did I ever tell you the story about when I was flying to England, like the 10-year-old British girl that was sitting across the aisle from me in the plane? Did I ever tell you this story?
No.
So I'm going, my ex-mother-in-law is British. So my ex-wife was, half British, and so half of her family is still in the UK, and they're having this big, huge family reunion, and we were going over, and it was so long ago. My son is now 15. He was 2 at the time, or he was just short, whatever. We didn't have to pay for a seat for him because he was that little, whatever, just short of 2 years old or whatever. So anyway, so I'm sitting on the plane, and I'm ready to be the obnoxious American. Because I'm going over, I have my USA shirt on. I bought one in the Washington, D.C. airport. It's got a big American flag on it. And I'm going to go tell him. I'm going to remind him that, we won the Revolutionary War and all these things. And so my son is wandering up and down the aisle in the plane because, he's 2. And so he stops, and this little girl across the aisle starts talking to him because he's 2 and blah, blah, blah. And then he walks away. And she had this really thick British accent. So after my son leaves, I said to her, is this your first trip to the States? And she said, yes. And I said, where all did you go? And she said, we had friends in Virginia. We went to D.C. We were going to go to New York. We never made it, blah, blah, blah. So she gets done with the thing. And I said, so what did you think? And literally, her face lit up like Christmas morning. And she said, America is amazing. It is so much better than Britain. And that is her quote, word for word. And you can only imagine how many times the obnoxious American repeated this while I was on our trip to see the relatives. I was like, she's 10 and she already figured it out. So I'm with you. Once people get here, and when you get to other places, one of the things, our country is so new. People forget how old Europe is. We have so much more space. The infrastructure is so much more. They have 2-lane roads in very, very well-to-do hoity-toity areas of town, but it's not a one-way street, but it's only wide enough for one car. So you get to the intersection, you peek your head around the corner and make sure nobody's coming, because it's a 2-way street, but it's like an alley. So it's just everything's on top of each other. We have so much more space. We're so much more spread out. But that's also why our public transportation isn't as good, but that's another topic for another day. Yeah. But yes, I'm with you. People who've been to America love it.
It'll be interesting. We'll try to get Jason Fink on next week because there's a couple of things here in PA I want to talk to him about. But I think the China-Russian partnership, I find it fascinating and what that means. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out what it means because it just kind of happened this morning, kind of the announcement and the release. So I think there's a lot of people trying to figure out what that will mean. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about today is Amazon is raising the price of Prime in the U.S. It's going up to $139 a year, up from $119. So essentially a $20 price hike. People are not happy about this. I'm a little surprised that people are this upset about it. However, I also have this feeling of you can't fly space shuttles into space with celebrities for essentially what is fun. What he's doing isn't exploration. What he's doing is really it's for fun. When you're just taking celebrities up in a spaceship, it's fun.
It's a joyride.
It's a joyride. And so a small part of me feels like I am paying $20 more for Amazon Prime so that he can fly celebrities into space. I don't really know how to feel about that.
Well, you see the story at the same time where they're trying, his super yacht can't get through some historic bridge. Where did I say it was? Rotterdam?
I can't
the
remember.
bridge is like from 1878. Then it was rebuilt in 1940 or something like that. It got destroyed in World War II and they rebuilt it. And now they're making a request to partially dismantle it so his yacht could get through.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it is a very interesting time.
But here's the funny part too. Like, you look at inflation, you look at kind of the I don't know if I'm going to give up my Amazon over $20. Like, I don't think I am. So I can sit here and I can.
That's why people are mad, because they won't give it up.
That's what it is, right? So a part of me, like, yeah, like, I think it's bull crap, and like, but at the same time, I'm probably going to keep my Amazon Prime for $20 more. I don't know,
dude. If they doubled your phone bill and said you either have no cell phone or it's twice as much, you'd pay it. Now, the balance of that is there's other companies who would say, well, we'll charge you cheaper. But yeah, people are mad because it's just 20 more. And here, I mean, $20 a year. It's $1.80 a month. I mean, really. But people know they're going to have to pay it, because if you're an Amazon Prime person, you're addicted.
I totally agree. I think that there's an aspect to this too, though, where like they're saying it's higher costs, and they're going to say it's inflation, and they're going to say like the prices of things are going up and it's more expensive. But if you're a company, you can't say that and then go fly space shuttles with celebrities into the sky. Like, you can't go make a multi-million-dollar Amazon or Lord of the Rings television show to be on Amazon Prime. Like, you can't say it's inflation and the cost of delivering packages when every day I look and Amazon's doing something so out of the realm of delivering packages.
Have you bought jet fuel lately? Do you know how much that stuff goes for?
No, I personally have not been in that situation yet.
Well, I have not either. Not lately, at least.
No, I mean, listen, I would, if Bezos would have came up and he would have said, listen, we want to keep building on our space. We want to keep building on our media empire. We're hoping the Lord of the Rings show is a success. We're hoping to do like privatized space trips sometime soon. And like, because of that, we have to raise I would have respected him way more. Like, I would have been like, all right, like, yeah, if you're going to do those things, like, it costs more money. But to, like, act as if, like, those are, like, you're spending money on all this stuff and, like, I have to pay $20 more because delivering a package is expensive. I just don't, it's not real.
Maybe I'm the minority here. Do you have any desire to fly around in space?
Do I personally? No,
yes.
I have very little. But I also,
by very little, I have none.
I have very little.
Planes are boring. You look out the window.
But this is different. See, I've had this debate with some friends. It's not comparable, because when you're like, the first time you're on a plane and the view of it and just like seeing the country or seeing the, like, you just get that feeling of how small you are, like that fuzzy whatever. I can only imagine on a space shuttle when you are so far out and you see the planet, like you see Earth and the effect and the inner. So a little part of me gets why somebody would want to do that. I truly do.
What is the effect?
You've never
We're
had
way far away from home. That's the effect.
There's something deeper than that. It's like when you're staring out at the ocean and you just have this moment of reflection of like what really matters and how, like, it just shrinks your ego down for a second and just kind of, no, you never have that when you look at the ocean.
That's I look at the ocean. I think what really matters.
Oh my God! You never do that.
I think I'm gonna have trouble getting this sand off of me.
You never stare out into the ocean or the abyss and just ponder life's questions ever.
It's time. If I'm staring at the ocean, I'm wondering why I'm not on the boardwalk buying French fries. And no, I do not stare at the ocean and think of life. That does not.
So anyway, I get why people want to do it.
I love the simple hypnotic of the waves crashing. I love that.
Yeah. The key word there was simple, because that was
well done. Very nice, Jeffrey. Very
Thank
nice.
you. So I don't know. So if your Amazon is up, it's Mark is as deep as a snack pack pudding. There you go. No, you didn't get that one. Is that not a?
I was just
You
trying
didn't
to
like
think. I
that?
like snack pack puddings. Oh, Mark has lots. Mark just does not stare at the ocean and think depth.
Heather,
I
that's
mean,
literally
no
what
pun
the ocean
intended, because I
is.
realize the ocean's deep. That's not in that.
Heather says, I wouldn't care about the Amazon price hike if everything that is advertised as having free 2-day shipping actually came in 2 days and not 6. So I think we can all relate to that. No, it's not going to happen, but I think we can all relate to that issue right now.
That's not really
I don't listen. Weird show, weird into the week. First, we had the debate yesterday to end the show. I don't know if I've fully recovered from that yet. And then we had the early segment today. Now you don't ponder the ocean's thoughts. I'm worried about you.
Me?
Yeah, I'm worried about you.
Go to the
you don't ponder's life thoughts when you look out into the ocean. You have this severe. You're worried about John Hopkins' research studies and whether or not they're doing what they should be doing. And then you have this false
See,
belief.
here you keep putting the wrong words in.
That baseball's this great sport. I'm really, really worried about you.
See, listen, this is the issue. You don't listen. I never said worried about Hopkins. I said curious. And even last night, I won't mention any names, but it rhymes with Jeff. You sent me this thing about baseball players, and all I said yesterday was the people giving max effort all the time are the pitchers and the hitters. You send me a picture of a guy leading off second base standing next to a shortstop, neither of which are the pitcher or the hitter. So anyway, I do want to mention this before we go.
Go for it.
And this is kind of a serious topic again, as we've kind of gone all around the map today. Before we had talked about, now that the Olympics have started, I'm tying this in. We had started before. There was a documentary called The Weight of Gold that Michael Phelps was involved with. And it was a study about the mental health and the abnormally high suicide rate of former Olympic athletes, because they've dedicated their whole lives to this sport, and then it's over, and then they don't know what to do. And there was just she's Australian, and she was some sort of skier, I want to say. But anyway, she went missing. She's 24 years old. She went missing. Then her body was found, and she's dead. And I don't think the cause of death has been released, but she has. What'd you say?
I'm following along with.
Oh, she has battled depression, and one of the things she was a competitive whatever she did, and I think it was ski jumper, but then an injury derailed her Olympic chances. But she has talked about, at times, she's battled depression, she's battled anxiety, and she's talked about, outside of being an athlete, I had no idea who I was, because all I've ever been was the athlete. And, so while we're watching the Olympics and, all the stuff of the skiing and the bobsled and all the cool things that go along with it, we need to keep in mind that this is it is high. A lot of this, we talked about just the pure danger of some of these events like snowboarding and ski jumping, but there is a mental danger, obviously, to these athletes to be all in on one topic and so tunnel visioned for so long. And then when it ends, many of them just kind of wander. And it's scarier than people know.
No, that was nice. That was good. I have not watched that for depth. I will watch that at some point. You've told me once or twice.
It is. It's called The Weight of Gold. Michael Phelps was one of because Michael Phelps, the greatest of the great, talked about how he was suicidal as he battled this, because once he stopped swimming, he didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I think he kept coming back and he's like, I'll do one more. And now he's married with a kid, or at least one kid. And now he's got other things in his life now, obviously, and he's grown through it, but he's very open about the struggles.
Michael Phelps, when he looks at the ocean, probably ponders life's biggest questions, is what you're saying.
He's probably thinking, I could make it to the other side.
He probably is.
In a multitude of, I could butterfly over, I could freestyle back.
Before we go, I don't know if you have any shout outs of stuff you've watched, because remember, we used to give shout outs of things we've watched recently. I got to watch Nightmare Alley, which is the Del Toro movie Bradley Cooper stars in it. Kate Blanchett's in it. William Dafoe is in it. I'm forgetting a bunch of other people. Really, really enjoyed it. If you're a movie buff, it is worth your time. And then the other thing that I just recently watched, I watched a documentary on The Price is Right. It's called The Perfect Bid. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Okay. Really, really interesting. It is about a guy who basically fell in love with the show, kept track of all the prizes, would challenge himself to memorize the prices and figure it out. And then he started going to the show, and he actually got onto the show. And then I think he got on the show twice, once with Barker and once with Carrie. It's only an hour-long documentary. It's if you are a fan of the show, and it's worthwhile. Really, really well done. It's a very cheap production, but it is incredibly well done, very entertaining. The guy himself is pretty fascinating. Really, really cool. The Perfect Bid is what it's called.
Well, I watched. It's funny you mentioned this. Well, because last night there's not a whole lot going on. I watched the Ghostbusters. Is it called Afterlife? The latest Ghostbusters movie
with Rudd.
And with who? Yes,
Rudd.
And I thought it was very entertaining.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
It's got a clever tie-in to the original, like Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray. And I'm a sucker for that nostalgic stuff, especially nostalgic 80s stuff, which I know you love so much.
Yes.
And it is enjoyable. It really, really is.
Nice. All right, that was good. We used to do that all the time. We haven't done it in a while. Where we're just kind of
what's the alley, because it's basketball season. We don't get to watch anything. What's the first what's it called? Nightmare Alley.
Nightmare Alley. Guillermo del Toro. Really, really well done. There's a couple of scenes with Bradley Cooper, and Cooper he just knocks it out of the park. He's so good. And when
I saw the previews for it, and I saw that Cooper was in it, I was like, this is kind of so different that it must be good. He wouldn't have done this. Like he's stretching his legs a little bit, or stretching his wings, whatever that cliche is. And he's showing off his talents a little bit, but he obviously isn't picking something that sucks. I wouldn't think. I was very curious when I saw this. Really,
really good. And it's and I'm not giving anything away. It's a cautionary tale. And so I think so often now, like everything's these big blockbusters and comic books, and then the other part of it is everything has to have a twist, or everything has to have and this is just from start to finish. This is a cautionary tale. And there's a lesson to be learned, and it's incredibly well done. It is, if you are a movie buff, it is worth the 2.5 hours. Really, really good.
Does the lesson to be learned have to do anything with staring into the ocean?
Listen, this character could have used some staring into the ocean and pondering life's major.
Need some ocean time? There you go.
He needed some time with life. He needed to see the earth and realize that his ego needed to shrink a little bit, for sure.
All right, there you go.
Thank you guys for watching the Midday Show. Thank you to Weiss Markets for being our sponsor. Be sure to go to NorthcentralPa.com for all your local news.
That's it. Enjoy your weekend.
All right, you too. I'm Jeff Everett. He's Mark Messina, and we will see you on